Good morning, everybody. Happy Easter. Pastor Allen here with a very special word of welcome to everybody at the Union Cross campus. Happy Easter, folks, and to everybody at the Ascent. So glad to be with you this morning. Once upon a time, there was a young man who was looking for an apartment to rent and finally found a lovely situation in a guest house that was behind a big home, two elderly sisters who lived together there, and they rented out their guest house to the young man. And they were a little bit eccentric, these sisters, but wonderful ladies. They had a very, very special pet rabbit. It lived in the back in a little pen, their little pet rabbit. They loved that rabbit. And one thing that the young man worried about was that he had a dog that was very interested in that rabbit, and so he worried about that. And one time he was gone for a long weekend, and when he came back, to his horror, his dog came trotting up with the rabbit in its mouth, dead and covered with dirt. And he was so embarrassed, he just didn't know what to do. He just couldn't stand the thought of these two nice ladies know that his dog had killed that rabbit. So he took that rabbit and he washed all the dirt off of it and got the blow dryer out and fluffed up the rabbit's fur and made it look like it was still a rabbit, and went and put it back in the pen. And early the next morning, he looked out, and there were the two ladies that were standing there at the rabbit pen, and they were crying. They were in shock. And he came out and he said, "What's wrong, ladies?" He said, "Did the rabbit die?" And they said, "Yes, he did die 3 days ago, and we buried him. And we came out this morning, and he's back." Are you ready for some good news? We don't have a rabbit story to tell today. We've got a real resurrection story. And we're going to today talk about what do you do with those kinds of regrets in your life. I mean, everybody's got a dirty, dead rabbit somewhere in their past, something that you are ashamed of, or something you regret, something you wish had been different in your life. And what do you do with that? How do you deal with the gnawing regret and anxiety of feeling like something in you has just been messed up? And how does God really feel about you? Well, that's what I want to talk about as we continue today to talk about the life of Peter, who was, of course, one of Jesus' disciples and who went on to be the one who preached the sermon at Pentecost and became really the leader of the church, the one that Jesus called the rock upon which he would build his church. And we have been, for weeks now, walking along this journey with Peter. And here on Easter Day, I want to stay with the journey with Peter and take you to one of the stories of the resurrection. It's in Mark. It's in chapter 16. And we're going to learn just how Jesus feels about Peter and all of Peter's mistakes in his life. But more importantly, I want you to see once again today how much God loves you. It's Mark chapter 16, verse 1. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you'll see him, just as he told you." Peter. What we've been learning about Peter is that Peter is a gregarious, impulsive, capricious, likable man who will promise you the moon and mean it, but hardly ever able to deliver it. He's the kind of person that is inspiring to be around and you want to believe that he is going to be able to accomplish what he says he's going to accomplish, but then he's always seemingly, one way or another, falling down. So in many ways, the story of Peter is a story that accentuates these dramatic failures in his life. I mean, accentuating, like shining the light down on these failures. This is what's recorded about who Peter is. This is the disciple who, when Jesus was walking on the water, Peter said, "If it's you, Jesus, tell me to come." And so Jesus said, "Come." And Peter steps out of the boat, and he's walking for a few moments, and then he sees the wind and the waves, and he sinks. And it's funny, what we remember about the story is not that Peter walked on water, at least for a little while. We remember he's the one who sank down in the water and had to be lifted up by the hand by Jesus. Peter is one of the ones that Jesus takes with him to Gethsemane when it's the hardest time for Jesus, and he knows that he is going to be crucified, that he's going to take the sin of the world and drink the cup of God's wrath, and he needs his friends to pray for him, and Peter is one of those. And he says, yeah, we'll pray for you, but he falls asleep. Peter is the one who says to Jesus that he will never leave him. And he says, though everyone else fall away, I won't. And Peter just absolutely boasts in his commitment to Jesus. And Jesus says to him, this very night you'll betray me 3 times before the cock crows. And so it happens. Peter is ambitious to try to protect Jesus. He cuts off a soldier's ear, try to protect Jesus, and Jesus rebukes him. He heals the man's ear. So this good intentioned man goes into the evening like that. But once Jesus has been arrested, and once they take him before the tribunal, and it becomes clear that the tide has turned against Jesus, once it becomes clear that Jesus is going to be crucified, when all of that starts happening, then it changes for Peter. And a servant girl comes up and says, weren't you with him? And Peter says, no, I don't know the man. And then Peter is asked again by someone, and this time Peter, with an oath, the text says, swears he doesn't know the man. And when it happens the 3rd time, I'm not positive about this, but many scholars think that the way that the Greek language reads in the story, it says that he cursed and swore. That it's very possible that in an effort to distance himself from Jesus and to make it look like that he would have never been a follower of Jesus, that he might have actually cursed Jesus and swore again, I never knew the man. He denied him 3 times. Peter's famous for this. So you read along in the life of Peter, and if you're going to understand his story, you get a picture of a man who so wants to be a great disciple, a great man. But in the moment where everything's in the balance, in one way or another, Peter fails. And when Peter hears the cock crow, and he remembers how Jesus had told him that he knew that Peter would deny him 3 times, and it all hits Peter, he just goes out from the courtyard and he begins to weep and weep and weep. He is full of shame at this moment, full of a sense of condemnation over having not been able to do what he said he was going to do. He is experienced those 1,000 different emotions that go along with great failures when you have aspired in a certain direction and thought you would be able to do it, and then you didn't. Those moments in which the worst part of you came out. Whatever Peter's feeling, it's what goes with all of that. It's one of the worst feelings in the world. You ever had those moments like that where you really meant to do something and then something happened and you weren't able to, and that particular kind of it feels worse than others. Few years back, I had at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville met a wonderful man who runs a Christian radio station in Iowa, and I enjoyed talking with him. And our program was broadcast on his station. And he said, "Hey, sometime, would you be willing to get on the phone with me and let's do a radio program on shame and the power of the gospel to heal shame, and talk about this, talk about your book on this, and we'll build the whole radio program around it, do live, we'll have some call-ins." He said, do you think you could ever just spare an hour to do that? And I said, "Oh, of course, man." I said, "I'd love to do that." And so we lined up a time many months away that I would be his call-in guest and we would do the program. It was something I put on the calendar, and I always follow my calendar but it was put into a time of the week in which I'm normally not working. It's normally a time in which I'm not thinking about work, and sometimes I don't maybe check the calendar as much for a moment like that, and it had not been on the radar screen, so to speak, for a while. And I was actually, at the moment that I was supposed to be on that radio program, I was actually on the golf course. I've never missed a wedding. I've never missed a funeral. I've never missed church. I have mortal dread of doing something like this. And I was just happily out playing golf. And then I have no idea. It was just something one of the golf partners said, somebody mentioned radio or something. And when ever had a moment like that, it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I think I pulled out my phone to look at my calendar. I was like, "Oh my!" By this time it was too late. I had missed it. It was just missed it by a half hour. It's over. And I played the worst round of golf you could imagine I ever played after that, thinking, because my mind is just going through this poor brother I could just see him coming on the radio live and advertising it ahead of time. Our special guest, Alan Wright, talking about his book, and we're going to be talking about shame and how the gospel can heal shame, and you're going to be able to call in and speak to the author and all of this, and I could just imagine saying that, and then just imagine this moment in which he gets on the radio and said, and in just a few moments we're going to be talking with Alan Wright, and the phone call comes to me, and there's no answer, and he says, "Sure that Pastor Wright will be checking in with us any month." I mean, how long did it go on, and what did he do? What did he do with the hour program? What did he fill it in with? All these thoughts were in my mind. I didn't think about golf. I couldn't play golf at all. And finally, when I called the guy afterwards, I didn't tell him I was playing golf. I said I got wrapped up in something else, and I was like, everything within me, what did I want to do? I wanted to find a way to make it up to him. I said, "Brother, I'll fly up there. We'll do multiple programs. I'll come in. I'll clean up your radio station for you. I'll mop the place. I'll do what can I do?" Because everything with it just feels so bad, doesn't it? But, we all are going to make some mistakes like that. But what about the bigger things in life? It leaves you with a feeling that is hard to go away. It's hard for it to go away. Maybe you can get over it if you missed an appointment like that. But what about if you told somebody, "I do," and then the marriage failed? What if you had made a promise to a child and you never followed through? What about if you've let down your best friend? What about the besetting sin? It seemed like it keeps coming back. And the more that you think about it, it just makes you start feeling like a failure. The word for this is shame. And it leaves us with an inward sense of anxiety and even despair that what I have done is too much. And it somehow taints everything else. There's a spiritual battle that is going on. And part of this spiritual battle is to get you to condemn yourself so that your life will not only miss the peace and joy that God has designed you for, but to also keep you from your destiny. Because here's what happens. You can imagine this in Peter. We just have to imagine what he's experiencing and feeling. But in his bitterness and remorse and feelings of condemnation of what he experiences, like we've all experienced, you begin to feel very isolated. And you can almost begin to expect to be rejected by others or by God. You can begin to disqualify yourself. You ever felt like that before, where I feel like an imposter even if somebody's called me to something important? It seems like, well, if they really knew who I actually am, they'd get somebody else for this. You can sabotage yourself. And what happens with me, maybe you experience this too, is that I want to try to find a way to make it up. And so you find that you can lose your boundaries. You're always trying to do more. It's never quite enough. And so nobody is immune from this, because even the super successful, even if they don't have something that they regret deeply, there's always a nagging feeling of I could have done more. So for some of you, it might be that you don't have something big in your past that is haunting you like that. It's just you have a gnawing feeling of I haven't done enough. It was interesting. I read some time ago an interview with the New England Patriots quarterback Tom Brady, one of the highest, if not highest paid NFL players in history. Won 4 Super Bowls. I think he's been the MVP in 3 of those Super Bowls, maybe all 4 of them. I know in 2010 he signed a $72 million contract. That contract's now been renewed. I don't know the price tag on that, but at the time he was the highest paid NFL player. Married to a supermodel who is, I think, the highest paid. They've got a $20 million mansion in California and a $14 million condo in Manhattan. And in 2005, the 60 Minutes correspondent Steve Kroft interviewed Tom Brady. And Brady was surprisingly vulnerable and open about some of his inmost feelings. Brady said, I put incredible amounts of pressure on me. When you feel like you're ultimately responsible for everyone and everything, even though you have no control over it, and you still blame yourself if things don't go right, I mean, that's a lot of pressure. A lot of times, Brady said, I think I get frustrated and introverted, and there are times where I'm just not the person I want to be. And then listen to this. This is what he said in the interview. Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. But me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. I mean, I've done it. I'm 27. What else is there for me? And the interviewer, Kroft, said, what's the answer? And Brady responded, I wish I knew. I wish I knew. What I'm saying is that the dynamics that Peter was experiencing, we've all tasted of this, where you feel like you either have really messed up or you haven't done it right or you haven't done enough. And the shame of this is extremely painful. So imagine how Peter was feeling as he wept those hot tears of great remorse. He had loved Jesus, and he had just sworn and cursed, saying he never knew him. That's the context. So these ladies who go to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body according to Jewish custom arrive, and this huge stone has been moved away. And when they step in, they are completely confused. And at first blush, what they think, as is recorded in other narratives, is that someone has taken the body. And there is this strange figure. It is just, in this text, is called a young man. Elsewhere, we know it's an angel. But this angel is wearing white, is just sitting there, and speaks to the ladies. And in the midst of the conversation, the angel has something very specific to say. And what you're left wondering is, the angel, which means literally a messenger of God, the angel was given the message. Who gave the angel the message? I don't know this, but I just wonder if at the resurrection, kaboom, Jesus rises up on Easter morning, and there's the angel there. And maybe, just maybe, it's Jesus who, as he's leaving, speaks to the angel and says, when they come, here's what I want you to tell them. But in a very specific way, whether it's Jesus or it's by the Holy Spirit or the angel has just been sent from heaven and has this message, there's some very specific words that the angel has. And this is what the angel says to the ladies at verse 7. Go, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And that's the message. And did you catch it? What's strange about this message? The angel didn't say, go tell the disciples, go tell everybody that he's risen and he's going before you to Galilee. Just go tell everybody. The angel says, go tell the disciples and Peter. And Peter. He singles out Peter. Why? Because Peter had denied the Lord. Peter had failed over and over again. But most horrifically, when Peter betrayed Jesus and denied him. And Jesus wanted the message through these ladies to go back to tell the disciples, but to tell them, and he said, and Peter. And Peter, I want to meet in Galilee and fellowship with him again. Let Peter know that I don't hold it against him. Let him know that my life and my resurrection is not just for those who have done an okay job. I want them all to know, and Peter. I don't want Peter excluded. And so you can imagine that the scene, which eventually these ladies get over their shock, and the word is going to be conveyed to the disciples. And we have different nuances of how this gets conveyed in the different gospel stories. But I just imagine the moment where they come and they speak to Peter and they say, and Peter, Jesus specifically mentioned you by name. He's alive, and he's going to meet us in Galilee. And he just wanted you to know he called out your name, Peter. He's looking forward to seeing you. and Peter. God's always had a mercy for those who fall and fail. There was a man named Jacob. He was a conniver and deceiver and a thief. And yet God blessed him. There was a man named Joseph, and he had brothers that sought to kill him. But instead they sold him to slavery. And God used Joseph to restore them and to forgive them. There's a man named Moses. He was a murderer. And God used him for the redemption of his people. There was a man named David. He was an adulterer and a murderer. And God used him for the upbuilding of his kingdom. I mean, the whole Bible is just, it's a story of tell everyone of the love of God and Jacob. Tell everyone of the mercies of God and Moses. Tell everyone of the forgiveness of God and David and Peter. The other part of the message that the angel said for these ladies to carry to the disciples was that he'll meet you in Galilee just like he said that he would. So I want you to see this, that what happens here is that Peter makes a promise to Jesus that Peter doesn't keep. But Jesus makes a promise to Peter, having told him ahead of time that after my crucifixion, I'll rise again and I'll meet you in Galilee, that Jesus keeps his promise to Peter. Peter can't keep his promise to Jesus, but Jesus keeps his promise to Peter. Peter had promised to never deny Jesus, and Jesus had promised to die and be raised from the dead and meet again with them. Peter couldn't keep the simpler commitment. Jesus kept the deeper commitment. And he wants to seek out Peter because this is the nature of God. His word does not fall to the ground. And when God speaks, he does what he says he's going to do. And so what's highlighted here is, and Peter, tell Peter, this applies to him too, but the point of this is that Jesus is saying to Peter, I am reminding you of my promise to you, instead of Jesus spending his energy trying to remind Peter of Peter's promise to Jesus. And I love this about Jesus, and I love this about the story, is that this would be a moment in which Jesus could have singled out Peter and said, and tell Peter, that rascal, that I remember how he denied me, and I want him to think about trying to become a better man. This could have been an opportunity for Jesus to meet with Peter in order to rebuke Peter. This could have been an opportunity for Jesus to demonstrate his disappointment in Peter. But that's not what he wanted. What he wanted was, he wanted Peter to know that all is forgiven. He wanted him to know that I'll meet you in Galilee. And I wanted him to know that there is hope and there's power in the life of the resurrection of Jesus. And I think that a key moment that brought a huge difference in Peter's life was actually recorded in the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke, during the moments that Peter is denying Jesus, there's an unusual thing that happens. I'm going to read a little bit of this from Luke chapter 22. This is the section of verses 59 to 62. Peter is denying Jesus. He said, man, I do not know what you're talking about. And immediately while he was speaking, the rooster crowed. So he just denied Jesus 3 times. He hears the rooster crow. And then the text says this, and the Lord, this is Jesus, turned and looked at Peter. What happened in that moment was right after the rooster crowed, right after Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, they were in a position where they caught eyes with one another. And what was in the eyes of Jesus, I'll tell you, love. He didn't stop loving him. And Peter must have seen the love in Jesus' eyes. And Peter was reminded of his love for Jesus. There was another man who betrayed Jesus, Judas. And Judas's remorse turned to despair, and he hung himself. But with Peter, it was different. Peter ends up being the man who preaches the Pentecost sermon when thousands come to Christ, and Peter's message becomes the foundation of the church, and Peter is used by God for miracle after miracle, and Peter enjoys the infilling of the Holy Spirit and joy and life and glory with God forever. What was the difference between Peter and Judas? He had caught the eye of Jesus, and his sorrow was godly because he was aware of the love of God for him, and all of his wondering and all of his shame, all of it got answered when he got word that Jesus had singled him out and said, "And tell Peter, I'll see him in Galilee." Ernest Hemingway wrote a short story that near the beginning tells a story of a father who had a wayward son. And that son named Paco, the father had done everything he could to find him, but he couldn't find him, and he knew the chances of being able to just happen upon his boy in the huge city of Madrid were nearly impossible. So instead, the father took out an advertisement in the local newspaper, El Liberal, and the advertisement read, "Paco, meet me at the Hotel Montaña, noon Tuesday. All is forgiven. Love, Papa." Paco is a common name in Spain, and on that Tuesday when the father went to Hotel Montaña, police had arrived on the scene to help control the crowd because there were 800 men named Paco waiting for their father. The Bible says that it's the kindness of God that leads to repentance. It's when you know that despite everything, that you're loved, that all can be forgiven. So, when Peter hears the words, "And Peter," he knows. He knows that because Jesus had singled out his name and said, "Be sure and include this good news message to Peter," Peter knows, I'm still loved. I'm still included. I have not been excommunicated. I have not been put away. He is not ashamed of me. And oh, can you imagine what this does? A lot of people think that if you were to just come to believe a gospel of grace and believe that God could just so freely forgive you, that you could be set free and forgiven from all the mistakes of your past, that it just seems too good to be true and it just seems too easy, and that if you were let off the hook like that, that somehow you would no longer try hard in life. A lot of people believe like that. A lot of parents and teachers and coaches, they'll sometimes withhold the affirming, accepting words of love and grace for fear that people won't try as hard. And I just want you to know that is not the way the human soul actually works. Because when we have sinned greatly, but find out that we are loved greatly anyway, when we discover the kindness of God, when we discover that His love for us is true and deep and pure and eternal despite all of our sin, when you discover what God has done for you in Jesus Christ through the cross, wherein He has become our sin, so that anyone who trusts in Him would not be any longer held responsible for your sin, not punished for your sin, and not enduring the wrath of God for your sin, because Jesus came to take all of that. He took upon himself the very wrath that should have been intended towards all of us. And when you receive this good news and you discover the power of the gospel to set you free from all the condemnation of your past and all the regrets, I'll tell you, it doesn't turn you into a lazy person. It does just the opposite. Those who have been forgiven much love much. Those who know God has forgiven you of much love God much. And those who find that their sin has been forgiven, they are the ones who are re-engaged with a higher hope than ever before. This famous moment in sports history, Roy Regal's January 1st, 1929, was the star center for the University of California. Golden Bears, the way they are, were playing Georgia Tech in the Rose Bowl. In those days, there was only one bowl game, the Rose Bowl, and there was no pro football. So the whole attention of the nation and all sports fans was put upon this game. There were 70,000 fans that were there, and so many listening on radio and hearing about it. There was no score in this hard-fought game until there was a fumble. And Roy Regals picks up the ball and takes a couple steps, gets hit, and gets disoriented and turns and starts running the wrong way 65 yards towards his own end zone rather than towards the end zone he was supposed to be traveling toward. One of his teammates chases him down at the 1 yard line and stops him just in time for Roy to turn around at the 1 yard line and get tackled. Following this, the team has to punt, and as they are trying to make the punt, instead the other team sacks them, and there's a safety for 2 points. And that 2 points in the end cost them the game. At halftime, what became his famous nickname, Wrong Way Roy, is sitting in the locker room, and the coach, who normally would give a speech, lets everything be quiet, and no one says anything, and everyone's sitting on the bench, and Roy has a towel over his head, and everyone's thinking the same thing. Roy was their star center. He played both offense and defense. And what was going to happen when they go back onto the field? The coach didn't make a speech. He just, shortly before the half was to start, he said, "All right, let's get back out there and do it. Same team that started, back on the field." And Roy just sat there for a moment. He said, "Coach, I can't do it." He said, I've ruined it for the team, and I've ruined it. And Coach just looked at him and said, "There's a whole half of football left. I need you back out on the field." And they say that Roy put in the best half of football imaginable, blocked a punt, and the next year he was captain of the team and an all-star. Because there's a dynamic that happens when you have been forgiven much. Something of hope that comes up in your heart. Everybody, somewhere, in one way or another, has a dead, dirty rabbit in the past. And there's a part of us who would like to just try to clean it up, fluff it up, and pretend like that it's okay. But it's not. Sin's a problem. And Jesus came as the answer. The answer was not to gloss over all of our mistakes. The answer was for all of the punishment and shame that we deserve to be put upon Jesus. And he willingly went to the cross and promised that not only would he take that sin, but that he would rise again. And on Easter Day, the angel said, "Go and tell them and Peter that I'll be there." in Galilee. On this Easter day, how about this? Hear the words of the angel and put your name in there. Tell the disciples and Alan. I look forward to seeing them in Galilee. To be a Christian is not to be someone who somehow fixed your past, done something to make up for your mistakes. It's just someone who says, I believe Jesus died. I believe he rose from the dead. And I'm ready to be friends with him if he loves me like that. And Jesus does love you, no matter what you've done. And Peter. And that's the gospel.